Who's going for coffee? Who's going for coffee? So no one's going for coffee. Who's going for coffee?
Welcome back to Who's Going for Coffee. Here we are back in the back room at the great local and Elevator Constructors Union Hall. With me here today is my good friend and real important person here in this local, Brendan Loftus. How you doing, Brendan?
Doing great. Glad to be here. It's really exciting. Yeah. Who's going for coffee? I love it.
Who's going for coffee? It's good stuff, right?
I did that really well as an apprentice. I went for coffee really good.
Did.
Yeah, I was good at that.
I'm sure that was probably maybe the only thing you were good at for a while was getting coffee. 20 guys sent you out. You came back with 12 coffees and right?
And a couple of new hat.
You got good at it though, right?
New hat. New hat. They said get yourself something, so I got a hat.
I got a hat. So listen, Brendan, Director of Member Assistance right now. But before we start talking about what you're doing, and I think what you're doing is, you get a lot of support here. You know that. I think what you're doing here is awesome. I wish we had 10 guys helping you out because it's probably unfortunately needed. But before we start talking about what you're doing now for the members, talk a little bit about how you get into this trade. I'm always interested. I do know your story, but to me, it's always interesting how people get into this trade. This isn't one of those things where, for some, they come out of the womb and they're going to be this, because of mommy or daddy or whatever. But for the most part, I don't think too many people say, "Hey, I want to be in the trades or an elevator constructor." So, what got you here?
So, it started. My family was all union. My dad was a sand hog for 20 years. Working in the tunnels, building subway tunnels, water tunnels, 800 feet underground. Really tough job on his body, and it took its toll. Ended up eventually killing him from the silicosis, from working down there. Everybody who worked down there got it. But, we were all union families, whether we were in Carpenters Union or, it goes back to my family in Scranton where they were all coal miners when they came over here from Ireland. So when I was a young kid, lost, couldn't find my way, doing a lot of crazy stuff, and, took my GED after I got thrown out of high school. Or I should say, Mount St. Michael Academy for Boys requested that my presence not be needed anymore. But listen, I had a long life of, trouble as a kid. It always seemed to find me, or I found it. So the first job I did was I worked with my dad as a sand hog, right? I was what they call shaping. So you didn't have to be a union member. It was kind of like being on permit, right. And you would go shape, usually you'd go to the 11 to 7 shift because that's where most guys didn't show up, that 11 at night to 7 in the morning shift. So I'd get a couple of shifts, make a lot of money. Back then I was, drinking it away and partying and being but I realized right away I didn't want to do that work. Like I was like, this is way too hard and this is brutal.
That's a different level of
that was
labor.
Yeah, I was just like, no, this ain't for me. Yeah. I wanted to be like the next Jim Morrison, except I couldn't play a musical instrument or sing. But like I wanted to party like a rock star in my life.
Those are mere formalities.
Yeah. So went from there to my uncle, who was an operating engineer. With 15, he said, I can get you with the ironworkers, local 40. You want to do that? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great. So I went to my first job, which was Worldwide Plaza. I was probably 19 years old. I was there for 2 years, just over 2 years. I was there from beginning to end. Right. Did that, as an apprentice, and made a lot of money, and it was great. Again, a lot of trouble in my life at that time, because I was having issues with drugs and alcohol and the law and things like that, and still losing my way. That job ended, and I kind of knew then, like, I need something different. I need to get out of New York. I need to do something different. My life is just spiraling out of control. And a funny story is I was going to join the Marine Corps, right? Basically because I liked their uniform, and I was like, they look like badasses, and I'm going to go join the Marine Corps. So I walked to Fordham Road in the Bronx, where they used to have these two like standalone shacks on the Grand Concourse, and one was across the street from the other. One was the Army and the Air Force, and the other one was the Navy and Marines. So I walked in there, and I said, "Hey, I want to join the Marine Corps. Who do I got to talk to?" So the Navy guy goes, "Well, the Marines out to lunch, but you got to take this pre-ASVAB test. We got to make sure you can read and write. It's for all services. You know? So we'll take you across the street. You'll take this little test. We'll see where you're at." So I took the test in 10 minutes. They were like, "Oh, you're good." And I never forget it because there was this Master Chief in there, and he was wearing all whites, and he had his row ribbons. And he said, "Man, you would look good in Navy whites. The women would love you."
Sold.
Like, sign me up. So I did 5 years in the Navy. I was an operations specialist, worked with navigation, intelligence, became an air traffic controller, and I did really well in the Navy. It's a very structured life, right?
Yeah.
And I did well under structure.
Yeah.
Got in some trouble, but not too much. And did a lot of time at sea. Fought in a war during Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I spent 9 months over in the Persian Gulf. We were the first battle group over there. And we came home. I got to march in the parade down the Canyon Heroes, which, as a New Yorker, is pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
When there was like millions of people out there. And then when I got out, I was kind of squandering, not realizing what I wanted to do. And again, my uncle, who knew guys in the unions, and he knew, John Green, and him and Tommy Nolan were paratroopers in Korea together. So he's like, "Hey, I can get you in the elevators. You'll work like a gentleman." And I thought, sure, I had no idea what I was getting into. I was not very mechanically inclined. Could barely read a tape measure at that time. I used to round everything off to quarter, half, and three-quarter. That doesn't work well when you're dropping lines. No, I remember the first time they told me to go into the pit and measure the line, and I completely just rounded it off to the big number, and they were like, "We're way off." And then the mechanic came down. He's like, "What are you looking at?" And I was like, "Well, I just rounded it up." And he was like, "You're an idiot." He stood there with a piece of chalk, and he wrote on the wall, and he taught me how to read a tape measure down to a 64th. He's like, "We go down to a 64th here." And I was like, "Okay, now I know." So yeah, I got into the elevators. I was still in the throes of, the disease of alcoholism and addiction, and didn't realize it. I thought it was just, if I had the right job, if I had the right girl, if I had the right, I always blamed everybody and anything for my problems,
Well, let me ask you a question before so you come out of the service.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a decision to maybe stay? Like when your obligation was up, were you like jonesing to get out of there, or was there a choice? Like, you know what, maybe staying here is a good thing for me.
I could have stayed. They offered me like, a $20,000 signing bonus, and then you could get a pick of duty. I had no real urge to stay. I always felt like, listen, the one bad thing about the military is they don't pay.
Right.
I think at the time I was at E5, which is, like a sergeant. I was in charge of like 25 guys. I had a top secret clearance, and I was making $17,000 a year.
That makes me nervous.
Yeah, that's scary to think about. But I was like, I could make the same money working at McDonald's,
Yeah.
And I was ready to come home, and do something else. I didn't think being an air traffic controller in the Navy or an OS was going to be my path. I thought 5 years was probably a year longer than I wanted to be there, But listen, it's funny when you're in there. All you do is bitch and complain. That's what we do.
And then you're looking to get out.
And then you want to get out. And then when you look back at it, it was probably one of the greatest times of my life. You know what I mean? The camaraderie that I built with other service members and guys I served with there was nothing that compares to that.
Do you think now? Listen, I know you wouldn't give up where you are in your career here, but looking back, maybe staying wouldn't have been a bad thing. And when you look back, right? A lot of people look back in high school. I can't wait to get out of high school. And then it's like, it was the best time of my life. And you just said it. When I was in the service, I couldn't wait to get out. I'm complaining all the time, but now you look back very fondly of your time spent in the service. How do you think life would have went for you if you had stayed?
Yeah, it probably would have. I would have done well. Like, I did really well in the military. Like, I advanced up the ranks. I always tested well. I could have actually sat for my E6 test before I left, but I was like, I don't need to do that, right? Because I'm leaving. So I could have done well and, saw more of the world. I probably would have, succeeded there. Maybe not gone through some more trials and tribulations that I had to go through when I came back into the civilian world. Yeah. Because when I did, it was going back to the same thing, right? Going back to the Bronx, same people, same crowd, same activities. I don't know. I don't feel like I have any regrets. Like, I feel like I did 5 years and I am proud of it. You know what I mean? At the time, I never thought when I joined I was going to go to war. Because when I went in 1988, there was nothing going on. There was no conflicts, and then all of a sudden we were thrown into a couple of conflicts, right, that I was a part of. And then it became real. Then you're like, wow, yeah, this is what I signed up for, right? Like, that I might have to put my life on the line here, And we didn't know how much Iraq was going to, be able to, fight against us. We didn't know if it was going to be, one-sided, which it pretty much was.
Right.
But there was a couple of hairy moments, but not too many. Being out at sea, their Navy wasn't anything to speak of. So.
Right.
And whenever came our way was taken care of.
You were part of the greatest fighting force in the history of the world, right?
They are the greatest fighting force. Listen, I get into it with the Marines all the time.
I know you do.
And listen, Marines are the most badass dudes I've ever met. Like, between them and like Navy SEALs who I've worked with on my ships. They're badass dudes, man. They run into it. When there's an explosion, they're running towards it. Yeah. But we can take out continents. You know what I mean? Like, the Navy comes in, bro. We can take out like a whole continent. It's like you're talking about nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. It was pretty amazing when we were over there, and it was because we were working off a joint force. We were working with the English, the Australians, the French. I mean, huge navies, right? And I mean, the power was just unbelievable to see that. That many ships and that much force out there was amazing to see. And then we'd all hit port together. And the only bad thing about being in the Persian Gulf, the only port we hit was Saudi Arabia, and there was no booze in Saudi Arabia, and that was not a fun place to go hang out.
So now you came back to the Bronx.
Came down to the boogie down, right? Came back to the boogie down, and I was bartending for a while, odd jobs, and then my uncle called me and he said, you can get in the elevators, and I went to work in construction as a helper, and I remember not really knowing what I was doing.
So you had no idea really what you were getting into, like really what Local One's all about, their prominence in the building trades. Like,
none.
You were just like,
no, zero.
I'll try this job.
Listen, it was a job to me. It was a good job that paid well, and I never looked at it as a career, like as a because I was too busy. It was like I worked hard when I came to work. The problem was I didn't always come to work. And, I worked really hard, but my motivation wasn't in it. It was, when's lunch and when am I going home?
Right.
Like, I don't care about the job, when it comes in, I don't care about those things. I didn't really even care about learning. You know what I mean? Like, if someone showed me something, okay, great. But I wasn't asking the questions and trying to better myself at all. And because I was, listen, I was 25 years old, and I was probably emotionally like a 12-year-old, because that's where my disease took me, So I really didn't know anything about the elevators and the union and being a part of it. And my first few years, I wasn't involved at all. Like, I didn't go to, I had a permit for like 6 years. I didn't go to school for my first 3 or 4 years. I wasn't even going to school because no one ever told me to go to school. And I remember I got a phone call from Joe Nolan. He's like, you should have been in school 3 years ago. What are you doing? And I'm like, oh, no one sent me a letter, and they were like, get your ass in school, right? And then I went to the old Mechanics Institute down on 47th Street.
Times Square.
My first teacher was Joe Sergio. Mm-hmm. Phil knows Joe, and everybody knows Joe. He was a great teacher. But, it was a lot different then, but I still wasn't this active guy. I wasn't I hadn't really learned about what true unionism is, right? And what it does. And that wasn't until, a few years into it where I hit bottom, right? Because that's where it took me. Yeah. The drinking and the drug abuse just took me to a place that I could never have imagined, And then I really saw what Local One was about.
They're the ones that picked you up off the deck.
Yeah, so what happened was, I was in the throes of it, and it was out of control. I couldn't hold a job. It was always, I was the last guy hired, first guy fired.
They saw you coming down the street. They closed the doors at the Union Hall.
Yeah, well, I always make the joke. I used to call, and they'd hang up. And then I'd call back, and they'd hang up. And I'd go to the hall, and I'd say, we keep getting disconnected. And they'd say, no, we're not getting disconnected. We're hanging up on you because, you need to get your act straight now.
Yeah.
Listen, there was some truth to that. The hall was a lot different back then, out in Whitestone.
Yeah.
And, if you guys remember the characters that worked there, they were not friendly. They were always yelling at me, Loftus, this is your last chance. So, I was always this guy who was, basically a screw up because I couldn't make it to work. I'd bang out on Mondays and I never called. I never called in and said I'm not coming because I was full of fear and guilt and remorse, and I couldn't pick up the phone. And I lost a lot of jobs because of that.
Yeah.
And then it was, I lost a job. I was working for a small outfit out in Jersey, Arrow Elevator. And they finally got sick of my act after working there for a couple of years. They laid me off, and I got a call from a local one guy who I had met one time before at bagpipe practice, because I was in the original bagpipe guys. We were all learning how to play. We didn't even have bagpipes yet. We had the teacher.
Just a bunch of Irish guys hanging out?
Yeah, we were learning how to play the notes, on the little, whatever they call those little clarinet-looking things. I forget what they called them. And then, Bobby Stack called me, and Bobby was a sober guy.
Yeah.
And he was kind of volunteering to help out. And he had called my father, because that's the number they had. It was my parents' house. I hadn't lived there in years, but that's the number they had on file. And my father was sober for like 20 years at the time. So he told Bobby, like, Brendan's got a problem. You need to get a hold of him. He needs help. And Bobby kind of called me up, and I never forget it.
Did you fault? Was that a blindsiding your father, or did your father kind of know?
Oh, my father knew since I was 12 that I had a problem. It wasn't like I was hiding it very well,
Right.
Listen, my parents had me out of the house when I was 17. I was gone.
Yeah.
They wanted me out, because I couldn't be trusted, and I was just...
So Bobby Stack took it upon himself to make that call.
Yeah, he took it upon himself. He called. He got my dad. Then he called me. He finally got a hold of me, and I was pretty beat up. I would say, I was probably near the lowest, because I was suicidal. I had already tried to commit suicide twice in my life, once as a teenager and once as an adult, and that was this weighing down thought constantly, like people would be better off without me, and I have no hope in my life, and like I'm just a screw up, and I'm always going to be this guy, and I can never make up for all the horrible things I did, so why even try?
Right.
And that was the mentality, and it felt like it was never going to go away, and I was in a lot of pain. And to me, pain is the greatest motivator. Like, you have enough pain, you'll do anything.
You're going to do something.
And Bobby called me and kind of told me his story over the phone. And it sounded worse than mine. I was just thinking, wow, this guy is bad. And he was like, you don't have to live like this, Brendan. And for the first time in my life, like, I kind of believed it for a second.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I don't have to live like this. And I just told him, I'll do whatever you want me to do, bro. I can't do this anymore. And next thing you know, they got me on a plane and sent me to Minnesota, where I went to a rehab facility for 30 days. And I got involved in a 12-step program, and it saved my life. This July will be 27 years.
So that's been it since then?
Yeah, since then I've not had a drug or a drink or, it takes a lot of work to stay sober. And, I don't think of a drink probably very, very little in my life today, but I still have to work on my thinking, not my drinking, because that's still screwed up. So, I have to have a program, and I have to have, a self-care routine that helps take care of that, and have spirituality in my life. But Local One, that's where I first saw, like, wow, these people actually care about me.
This ain't a job.
Right. These people care about me. And when I came out of there, and then I started to really grow as a person, I started to really see that it wasn't just like they care. I was like, it became almost the second closest thing I ever had to that camaraderie when I was in the military, right? Was that brotherhood I started to see. And then a really crazy story, because I'm a firm believer that there's no coincidences. Right? Like that people are put in your life for a reason. Mm-hmm. So I'm in rehab, and there was 8 Local One guys in this rehab at the same time. That's a lot of guys.
Yeah.
From a small local like ours in rehab. and there was a cast of characters, right? So I'm there like 2 weeks. And my job was to show the new guy around. Any new guys that come in, I got to show them this is where we eat, this is where we go to group, this is where I have therapy, this is your room. So this old timer comes in, and he's shaking like a leaf. You know, he's detoxing kind of from the booze. And he's much older than me. And so he was kind of in bed for a couple of days, and then we're giving him whatever to keep him sedated. And he comes out, and I have to show him around. So I find out he's a local one guy. Never met him before. So we start talking. I'm like, well, where you from? And he goes, well, I live in Stuyvesant Town. I said, well, where you from originally? No one's there from originally lives there. He goes, I'm from the Bronx. I said, oh, I'm from the Bronx. Where you from in the Bronx? And he goes, Riverdale. I go, I'm from Riverdale. My whole family's from Riverdale. I'm like, where'd you go to school in Riverdale? He goes, St. Margaret's. I go, I went to St. Margaret's. And my whole family went to St. Margaret's. My father and his 3 brothers went to St. Margaret's. Everybody went. And I'm like, how old are you? And he's like, I'm 63. And I said, my father's 63. And he goes, who's your father? And I go, Terry Loftus. And he goes, I know your father since I'm 5 years old.
Wow.
We had our first beers together. We played basketball together. We played baseball together. Like, I know him since I'm 5 years old. And my father had never told me that he knew somebody in Local 1, right? Like, just never mentioned it. And Richie, who was Richie Amberson, became one of my dearest and closest friends from that encounter. Became the godfather of my second child.
Really? Wow.
We went to the Super Bowl together. But he was the man who got me involved. Because when we came out of rehab, he said, hey, you got to join the picnic committee, bro. You know, I've been on the committee for 30 years. You got to be on. Let's go. And I was like, okay. I joined the picnic committee. First thing I ever did. And I learned about, you know, giving back to this great union, right? Like, because I had a sense of gratitude. Like, they saved my life, right? Like, I have to give back. And then he was like, you got to join the Labor Day Parade committee. And I was like, okay. Yeah, let's do it. And then, like, you know, he'd make sure I come to every union meeting with him, and like we'd hang out, and he would introduce me to who everybody was. I had no idea who anybody was. And he was the one who really taught me, you know, what it was to be a good union member. And then I remember I was at his retirement party, and he was retiring with another guy. I think it was Bobby Pfeiffer, and it was a small retirement party, and they were like, anybody want to say anything? And no one was kind of saying anything, so I said, yeah, give me the mic. I want to say a few words about, I had worked with Bobby. He was my foreman at one time, and I was like, and I have a lot of good things to say about Richie because he's such a good friend. So I get up and I do a little 10-minute spiel, you know, and Richie grabbed me afterwards, and he goes, you know, Brendan, you have a gift. And I was like, what's that? He goes, you're really good on the microphone, bro. He goes, you should use that gift. You know, you should really do that because you're good and you really can convey a message. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, what do I do? He's like, you need to get more involved. I'm like, I'm pretty involved. I'm on all these committees you got me on. He's like, yeah, you need to, like, do more, you know. And, you know, one thing led to another, and, you know, I got on the executive board, you know. With,
What year did you get on the executive board?
What year was that, Phil? That was 2010. Yeah, 2010. That's right. Yeah. So I was a mechanic by this time, right? I had been a mechanic for about 6 years. So I got on the examining board, where I was able to meet with the new members and you know.
So
interview them.
it was always the examining board you were on.
Yeah, I did 15 years on the executive board until this recent election, right? I didn't run. So yeah, it was. Listen, it was great. And I never dreamed in a million years it would turn into what it turned into.
Right.
You know, I just wanted to. My whole thing was I felt like I had something to give. And I was like, I think I can make this place better. You know, I don't know how I'm going to make it better, but I love this place. I have deep sense of gratitude for them saving my life. And I want to be able to give something back. And so I think I can make it better somehow. Well,
listen, I am going to speak for the membership, and you most certainly are. Listen, we've had many conversations. You know, I support you 100%, but I think this whole local does, right? They see... how fortunate we are that we have the resources to be able to have a dedicated guy, right? How many locals around the country have that dedicated guy? You know?
Only us.
Only us. And then think about all the other trades that are out there, right, that don't have that dedicated guy. You think about these poor guys that are working, you know, in these locals around the country where there's, you know, hundreds of miles in between the next guy, and he's having a problem. Who's eyeballing him and calling somebody up, right? But to have you here, listen, you've done such a phenomenal job. We're so fortunate for you to be here, and you're giving back, and you are doing such great things. But I just wish that we were able to do it on a more grand basis around the country, right? Where I can envision you being that guy that leads this group of not saying every local, because every local can't afford it, but maybe there's a dozen guys that just travel the country and are able to speak at union meetings and be able to have these classes that you're having, bring awareness to, the instructors or mechanics to be able to eyeball, some kid that's in the back of the room that, is showing signs, right? And to educate that apprentice too, because it could be the mechanic as well, right? It could be anybody. But I think what you're doing here is awesome. We see, these videos from you around the country and doing all these things. I think it's great. But I'm just so happy that we were able to, and I think you're the perfect guy. You really are. Listen, you'll probably be the first one to admit, I think you have to come from where you came from to be able to do your job. Like, I couldn't do it. Like, I would just say, bro, just stop, just don't drink.
Right.
What do you mean? You can't stop, right? So I'd be the worst person in the world to do what you do. You got to be able to come from that, the depths of that darkness to be able to, and then people are going to take you more serious, right? Listen, look where Brendan is. Look where he is in his local, how prominent he is, and he's successful, and his family, and his everything you got going on gives that kid hope, right? That I can do it too. Right?
Yeah, that's the conversation I have with the guys. Like, listen, you don't have to live like this. I say that line all the time. That was the line that really stuck with me, that you don't have to live like this. You may think you do, but there's a way out. And now we have like a proven way to do it. We know what works and what doesn't work. Sometimes it's harder than others, and it has to be on an individual basis, obviously, for what everybody needs and their family members, because it's not just our guys working in the field; it's their families. It might be their children, their significant others, right? Their wives or their husbands. So it's grown so much, and really we should talk about how it started, right? Because we were at a place in this local that was probably one of the darkest places we've ever had, because I was kind of on the executive board, and I had, said, I'll volunteer. I'll be like the Bobby Stack, right? Whatever. Right. Put my number out there. Put it on the calendar. Anybody needs any help, I'll help, any way I can. But it was just to be a voice, like someone to listen. And then we, in an 11-month span, lost 5 apprentices, right? 5 apprentices, all under the age of 30, all working, all going to school, died from overdose. And it was at the 5th wake, and I was there with Lenny Legati. And he said, hey, I got an hour and a half ride home. Call me. And I said, okay, I got about an hour. And we spent 2.5 hours on the phone saying, we got to do something different. We got to do something more. We can't watch this happen. Man. We are losing. If that happened, if we lost 5 young men on the job, we'd be on the street. We'd be out there with pitchforks and torches, right? Like, we'd be shutting down New York. But because it was an overdose, it's a dirty little secret that nobody wants to talk about, right?
But I think a lot of people don't know how to talk about it, right? Or it's a taboo, or don't talk about that, right?
It's a stigmatism, right? And it's a culture, right? And then, we had the idea of, going to the education and training department so we can start really educating our members, right, on what it is and what it's not. Because there's a lot of things out there that people think disease of the brain is what it is. Right. We know that medically. And we're able to teach that, and we're able to talk about those things and then start to shift that culture and that stigmatism. And we've seen it here in the last 8-9 years change dramatically. Yeah. Like dramatically cultural change to where people didn't want to, be a rat. They didn't want to, it's none of my business. Right. And, and I try to teach them, listen, you want to be a brother to a brother and a sister to a sister. If you see something, you need to say something to somebody. Yeah. I can't imagine, knowing someone's doing something that's harming themselves and putting themselves at risk and putting others at risk and not saying anything because I don't want to get in their business. But then I got to go to that wake and see 2 little kids grow up without a father, right, or see a mother have to bury their child, no one should want to have to go through that,
Right.
right? So we have a way. It's not, you're not ratting on people, right? You know, but we've done so much here, and the support I have gotten, which to start a program like we have, you need support from the top down. You know, and the executive board was great about giving me support from top down, and then that fed into the employers, which is very different from a lot of different unions. Like, they don't get a lot of the same support from employers that we do, because we've built up those relationships over the years. And, you know, we even went as far as to put it in our contract and get something in our contract that basically has it go through us, right? So it's not the employer, it's not the benefit, it's not some 1-800 number, help yourself. It's like, hey, we'll take it.
Right.
We're going to get you the help you need. It's going to be at no cost to you, right? And you're going to be okay, and you're going to have your job when you come back, right? And you're going to be much better off, right? And you can be safe on the job, and you can be safe at home, and you can be a different guy.
Yeah.
And we've seen it work, right? We know what works, and the culture change has just been dramatic. Mm-hmm. So that to me is probably one of the biggest things I've seen in the last 8-9 years, is that cultural change. But then we start adding mental health into the situation, because listen, 90% of people who are in throes of addiction of any sort have a mental health issue.
Right.
Like, I thought I just drank, you know, for one reason or another, but the real thing was, I was drinking and drugging to feel normal, because I had a mental health issue that I was undiagnosed and I had no idea, right? Like, that made me feel, it was the solution until it wasn't.
Yeah.
You know, so like it made me feel normal. And, you know, once it was taken away, didn't mean I felt great. Like, it was tough. That first year or two was really tough.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I was craving a drink. It was because I didn't know what to do with the thoughts in my head. But then I got help for that, right? And I went and saw a psychiatrist, and I went to group therapy, and I learned about self-care, and I learned about all the things that we learn, right? Which is exercise, diet, all these things that can affect our mental health. So that has just changed the way we educate our members, right? Just by me being able to go to a labor assistance professional and go to school for that and learn how to assess and refer and be certified. And then we say, well, we can do more, right? Let's take a mental health first aid, train the trainer. QPR, which is suicide prevention and awareness. And we're going to teach that class so we can have peer people on the job who have this 8 hours of training. So we've been the gold standard in my book, and it has started to stretch out to the IUEC. So, like, California has a couple of lap guys now, but they're volunteers, right? They're still working in the field, or they might be retired. Texas has some guys. Boston has a guy. Florida has a guy. So there are some people, but nobody's doing, or maybe they don't have the capabilities yet to do what we do.
Right.
But I can be a resource for them, which I am. I'll help anybody from around the country. I've helped hundreds and hundreds of IUEC members who are not in our local. So, you know, and even the employers, you know, like TK, you know, brought me down to Atlanta, did a whole, you know, TED talk for 2 hours, which was pretty amazing. And, you know, they put it out in their safety training. And I got dozens and dozens of phone calls from all over the country, because I gave out my phone number there. Not realizing, like, when I gave it out, I was giving it to the audience, not realizing it was going to be seen by 5,000 people. But just people will call me going, hey, that was great. That was an unbelievable message. Yeah. You know, that was the best safety training I've ever been to. Even through that one video that I just did a few months ago, I've already helped get 3 people in treatment. 3 people, 2 of them saw the video, said, hey, I need help. Another guy wasn't at work that day, so he didn't go to the safety meeting. But he was talking to his buddy and saying he's going through it. And his buddy said, yo, I got this guy's number. I just watched this video the other day. Why don't you call him? And he was in Colorado. And he called me, and I had him in treatment the next day.
Wow, that's
awesome. So like that, stuff like that is really starting to change the culture and the stigmatism. I think our biggest thing that's going on right now that I think has come to the forefront is really mental health and suicide, because, you know, the IUEC, you know, we haven't had a death, knock on wood, for a while, right? It's been over 2 years, right, that we haven't had a fatality on the job. I personally have confirmed, not just from this local, but from a few locals, only a handful of locals who I've spoken to, that there are at least 6 suicides in that time
Wow.
of IUAC members. So why aren't we talking about that? Because we're losing people at an alarming rate. I would say if I did a poll of the whole international, if every business manager said, tell me confirmed, you know absolutely this person committed suicide, that it's public knowledge, it would be near 12. That's my guess, because I know of 6 just off the top of my head that
Right.
I've
And
spoken to people about.
And you said it before, if that was 12 guys that went down a hatch, we would have a very different climate right now.
Right.
Throughout every local. You know, what are you guys doing? How come you're not doing this?
Right. And listen, the IUC has done a great job, and so does Local
Yeah.
1 with safety, right? Like, we really
Sure.
have just committed to safety, and we're just going to talk about it all the time, and we're going to ingrain it in everybody's workflow every single day. But when we're losing people at, 10 times the rate, I mean, in construction alone, we lose 5 times as more people to suicide than the general population.
Well, listen, that's one of the things that you say was eye-opening to me. I'm sure eye-opening to a lot. The high rate in the construction industry. And people would be like, the construction industry? Why the construction industry? You can understand, other high-stress jobs like the cops or whatever. But why the construction industry? Like, tell us why, those numbers are high in our industry.
Yeah, well, we've done the research on this, right? Like, so I sit on the NAB2 opioid task force with CPWR, and they've had studies done on why. Why is it that we have higher addiction rates than any other industry, and why do we have higher suicide rates than any other industry? And the reasons are, it's a compilation. So I think first and foremost is job security, right? When you don't know where your next job's going to be, right? That's a high stress thing, right? Like, if you're on a big construction job, it starts winding down and there's no real work going on, that stress of, I got a mortgage, I got 3 kids, like, what's going to happen in a month from now when I get laid off, right? Is there another place for me to go? And that's constant, right? Like, sometimes it's really good and everybody's booming and we had a great stretch for 10, 12 years, right? But that's not usually how the industry runs, right? Right now we're in a little bit of a lull, right? But that stress is huge. The long hours, we put in a lot of long hours, and we put that toll on our body, that physical toll. And that also leads to addiction. Because what happens? We work in an industry, it's not like we work behind a desk where we can say, hey, I blew out my shoulder, I'm going to work from home until this heals up.
Right.
If I don't go to work, I don't get paid. So what happens? We all get hurt. Everybody gets injured. It doesn't matter. If you're in this industry 15 years, you've been injured, right? The wear and tear and the constant, same motions over and over. You will get injured. What do guys do? They turn around and they go, well, I got to get to work, so let me just get some painkillers from the doctor because, I got to go to work. Those kids are counting on me. That mortgage has to get paid. So you talk about work, you talk about the physical strain, then you also talk about those hours that we work, and we put in a lot of hours, right? There's, all these jobs, they'll start on overtime. How many jobs, these big jobs start at, 6/10s right off the bat. That takes its toll right after a while. And then we talk about the culture and the stigmatism in the industry. So if you are struggling, like, can you feel you can talk about it to somebody? I'll share a story with you. I was sober 10 years. But that's a really good amount of time of sobriety, right? And I was active in my 12-step program. I was active in the union. I was a baseball coach. I was a basketball coach. I had just had my 3rd child, and I bought my first house. I was the first person in my family to buy a home. Right? I grew up in an apartment my whole life. So proud stuff, all great things, right? So here I am. I'm trying to get the house ready for us to move in, right? And I got like a month to get everything done, right? So I'm trying to, we're doing everything. I'm ripping out floors and bathrooms and painting and doing all the stuff you would do, right? All the stress of buying a new house. And, I had all the stress from work, working overtime and coaching Little League. And I was still going to meetings. But when I was sitting in these meetings, my head was thinking about, I got to get back to the house, and I got to do this, and I got to do that. And even though all these things were good things in my life, right, I was overwhelmed by it. Right? And I didn't know how to deal with that stress. Yeah. And I had this problem with my ego. Like, I thought, I'm 10 years sober. I shouldn't have to tell people my problems, right? They should be telling me theirs, which is just garbage.
Right.
Right? It does no good for anyone. But that's what my thinking was. And I remember just feeling so overwhelmed. Oh my God, I got to get this house ready. Now I got this mortgage. I've never had a mortgage like this. Like the 3 babies counting on me. You know, like I was overwhelmed. And I remember sitting in my garage, looking up at the rafter and going, I could just end this right now. Right? And in my head, like thinking, I'll throw a rope over this thing and I'll cash out. And I thought, how the hell did I get here?
Right.
Like how I'm a sober guy going to meetings and I'm supposed to be this, you know, this, whatever I thought I should be. And that's all just bullshit, right? Like, and I ran back to my meetings and I just went to my closest group of sober men and I was like, I'm fucked up. Like, I'm just in a bad place. I don't know how I got here. And it was just ego-driven and fear, right? And, you know, taking on this responsibility that I never had to deal with before. So here I was, and, you know, but that was a pivotal moment in my sobriety, right? It really made me check myself and be like, yeah, I still need to do the work, and I still need to let people know what's going on with me. So when we have guys on the job with this tough guy, suck it up, buttercup, rub some dirt on it mentality, that does nobody any good, you know, because people need to know that they have a place where they can go to work, and if they have to talk to somebody, they should be able to, you know. I'm sure if you work in an office, you're able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, we need to make it that on the construction site, that's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay not to be okay. Because everybody, I don't care who you are, is going to go through a tough time. Everybody, you know. Just because I got sober doesn't mean my life is a bowl of cherries. It's still hard.
The other thing, too, is, you know, your tough time may be a cakewalk for me, and my tough time is, it's different for everybody, right?
Sure.
Everybody deals with, you know, tough times happening in their lives in different ways, right? And sometimes, you know, we take for granted that somebody's doing all right when they're really not, you know. So, you know, I agree with you 100%. You know, the battle never stops, right? The seeking help or, you know, the struggle probably never ends.
No, it doesn't. And it doesn't matter what age you are. Yeah. Like, you know, there's so much data out there. Like, some of the highest suicide rates in the country is older people. People above 55 years old. Right? So, like, that's some of the highest suicide rates below teens. So, you know, and then the stress that, you know, people can come and talk and get resources for their kids or their wife, right? Or, you know, we don't know what people are going through. So there's so many things, and that, I think those 3 things are the biggest in the construction industry, right? That the mentality, the culture, the stigmatism, where they can't talk about things and they got to act like they're okay, everything's fine. You know, how many times you ask a guy, how you doing, bro? Now, me and you might really mean that. Like, no, how you doing? And you hear, living a dream, bro. Right. Living a dream, right? Are you really living a dream? Or are you just saying that because you think I'm just asking, just ask, right? Yeah. And, you know, there's a great video in the mental health first aid class I give where they have a woman sit down and she has 3 strangers come in one at a time. And they ask, how are you? Good, how are you? And she goes, not doing too good. And they're like, really? And you see their face right away, like, what? Like, I didn't know it was good. Like, you know, they just think everybody's going to say fine, like everybody does. And they're like, oh, really? Well, what's going on? And then she'll be like, you know, I battled with depression, and lately I've been, you know, really going through it, and it's been really hard, and, you know, it's affecting my life. And she goes into this whole thing, and, like, and then they stop, and they go, how did that make you feel? Like, hearing that from somebody.
Yeah.
Did you feel equipped to be able to help that person? And, you know, luckily for the video, obviously, they show people who are pretty compassionate and have empathy, but not necessarily the tools to be able to do something.
Right.
So I think that's where the real groundbreaking stuff is happening right now in the construction industry, in the building trades. So we started last year with Gary LaBarbera, brought in all the member assistance guys and some of the business agents and managers who are they don't have a member assistance program. And we said, what can we do to make a difference? We realized mental health is an issue in the construction industry. And I said, the first thing we got to do is we need education, and we need to be able to talk about this until it becomes normal to talk about. And we said, we need peer recovery people. We need peers on the job. I can't be on every job, right? You can't be on every job. But if we give some designated training, and we keep that training, that every building construction trade in New York is going to have the same exact training. Okay, They're written by us, for us, right? It's not made for the general public. It's geared towards our needs
Our industry.
as construction union members,
Right.
what our struggles are. So we've been working on that for over a year now. In August, we will have 2 sets of trainings come out hopefully by November, I think is the go date. We've been meeting every other week for the last 6 months. It's been a lot. We're in with Cornell University.
Cornell.
So Cornell University is going to write it. They're going to certify the people who take the training. They'll get a certificate from Cornell. They will be designated as peer support personnel. But there'll be 2 kinds of training. There'll be a 2 to 3 hour training that will be just a general kind of for anybody who wants to take it, right? General knowledge of like mental health in the construction industry. You will not be like a peer person, but you will just get this general education, which is great for everyone. Then we will have people who will be chosen by the local and by the member assistance directors to take this peer training, which will be 8 full hours more on top of that. Well, they will be able to recognize signs. They will be able to see things. They will be able to know how to ask certain questions to see where people are at, and then know what to do with that information. You know, is it somebody that just needs somebody to talk to for a little bit? Or is it like, this guy's thinking about hurting himself? Like, I got to get somebody on the phone right away, whether that's me or we call 988. There's so many different avenues out there it can go, and it takes a lot of training. I think that's going to be groundbreaking, and I think it's not going to only go well in the city, it's going to go to the state, and I think it's going to go to other states. Because that's really what we need. We need training that is geared specifically to construction workers,
Right.
especially union construction workers. Right. So that's I'm really excited about that. It's been a lot of work, and I can't wait for it to roll out. You know what I mean? And I think it's going to change the game. I think
it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Listen, you know, you said it before, right? What our industry, with the stresses, with you know, the time and all that, but you know, guys getting banged up. Right, they turn an ankle. You know, even if it's not these major injuries, but stuff that they feel they need to take something to be able to get to work the next day, right? Because you know, unfortunately, you know, it's human nature for a lot of guys maybe to live maybe a little bit behind their means a little bit, right? So you know, losing just 1 day's of pay becomes a problem, right? So they're going to take that pill to get them by, and that leads to the other things, right? So do you think that is the most common path to, you know, that drug addiction? Is it starts, you know, it doesn't start where he just decides arbitrarily, you know what, let me go try doing this, or is it that injury, or, you know, listen, I had surgery on my ankle last year. They gave me oxys, and I'm like, I don't want them, you know, and I was in such pain the next day. I did, and I wound up taking 1 or 2, but I was petrified that these things were going to have an effect on me, right? So is that the normal or the most common path where these guys wind up going to these other hideous drugs? It's the oxys, it's the painkillers, and it goes from there.
Yeah, it's very common. Yeah. So, you know, I've heard the stories over and over and over. You know, I've heard, you know, I got in a car accident, banged up my wrist, had to have surgery. You know, they gave me Percocets. You know, once you take any of those opioids for more than 30 days, even as prescribed, which most people don't. They just don't. They don't have the discipline to do it, right? They feel a little pain, boom, take a pill. You will go through withdrawal symptoms. And that withdrawal is the same as almost like heroin. And then what happens is you can't get the pills, right? Because the doctor might say, no, I'm not giving you any more, you know, after a few times. There's plenty of doctors that will, then that's bad too, right? Now, that's a whole nother, we could go into a podcast on, you know, the corruption of pharmaceutical industry that's killing the United States. But yeah, I've heard the stories over and over. And then it turns into, well, I started buying pills on the job.
And now what is it?
And now you don't know, because now they're making pills that look like Xanax and look like Percocets, and it's fentanyl.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then it turns into heroin, because it's not that they want to get high. They just don't want to go through the withdrawal.
Right.
Because it's so painful and it's so long, right? It could take 10, 12 days of just, you know, liquids coming out of every orifice of your body, right? Like that's pain in your bones, right? It's horrific. So yeah, I've seen it over and over and over. I had a guy once call me up and said, yeah, I had surgery 2 years ago, shoulder surgery, and they gave me oxys, and I got hooked on the oxys, and I couldn't get them anymore, and I started doing heroin. I said, did you ever have any drug history in the past? He goes, no, nothing. I said, how old are you? He goes, I'm 63.
Oh,
63, and he picked up heroin. And I'm like, wow, that's how strong it is, right? Like it's just, and you see it now. It's you know, when I was growing up, heroin and opioids were a thing that like, you could get any drug you wanted in the Bronx, right? Like you could get anything. I never knew anybody who did opioids. Didn't see it. It was like in the slums, like you heard about it, like, you know, the junkies down, you know, but I never saw it, right? And, but now it's, I don't care where you live, how affluent the neighborhood you live in, it's there.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And, you know, you think about how scary that is, right? You think about kids, you know, college kids who are going to parties and they're drinking and someone has some pills. You don't know those are pressed out of a lab that have fentanyl in it. It's just one time. And you're done. Yep. Fentanyl is so strong. I mean, it's 50 times stronger than, you know, morphine and 100 times stronger than heroin. It's amazing, you know, how strong it is. You know, a little flake of it landing on your skin, you could overdose. Yeah. And it's being shipped into this country, and people are making pills out of it. And it does lead from injury, though. You see it from injury. Right. I've seen countless members who started off with, I broke this, I pulled this, I tried to just get back to work, I threw my back out. You know, the doctor said, here, listen, the problem is it's the industry too, like that feed us. We need to educate our members that there's alternatives. I'll tell you another story. I had a kidney stone, right, and I had to have surgery. It was my first time ever having a kidney stone. I had surgery, they went up and got it, and I was going on vacation like 2 days later, and I'm down at the shore with my family, and I am in immense pain. I mean, I can't move. I can't sleep, right? So he's giving me Percocets, and I was taking them, and they were doing nothing, like zero for the pain. So I called up my doctor. I said, listen, these pills are doing nothing but giving me an upset stomach, right? Like, they're not doing anything. And he said, okay, I'm going to send you another script. Here's the local CVS near you. Go pick it up. I go there. I take one pill. Pain's gone. I was like, wow, I don't feel high. I don't feel anything, right? I'm like, wow, that was great. I took it again the next day, and then I was done, right? The pain was gone. I was like, okay, cool. And I had no idea what it was. I didn't recognize the name of the drug, so I Googled it. It was an anti-inflammatory.
Really?
I'm like, why didn't you give me this first?
Right.
Like, why didn't you give me the anti-inflammatory before you gave me the narcotic? Yeah. Right? You gave me 30 pills of, right, that I could overdose from or, you know, get addicted to. But that's the problem. That's the problem in the industry. They just want to, you know, get you in and out of the office in 5 minutes and just take this pill and you'll be all right.
They're a little quick to prescribe those damn things, right?
More than just a little quick. Right. You know, listen, I could go on a whole tirade on what I think about that. But, you know, we need to be educated. Like, there's alternatives, and you need to ask. You need to ask your doctor. Like, every one of my doctors I tell, even my dentist, I'm in recovery, so I don't take anything unless I have to. Like, if I'm going for surgery, obviously I'm going to take something, right? Excuse me. I remember I got a root canal done, and they were trying to give me Percocets. And I said, no, I've had a root canal done. I'm going to go home and take some Motrin. It's going to be sore for 2 days, and I'm going to be fine. No, just take the prescription. And I almost got into an argument. She asked me 5 times to take the prescription. And I'm like, how many times do I got to say I don't want it? You know, and the dentist knows I'm in recovery. I don't need to be taking that stuff. I don't need anything that's going to change my mood or alter my mood. So it's a problem, and it's really easy, you know. It's really easy to get it, you know. And the Xanax is a big problem, and Adderall, all these drugs that are out there that they hand out like, I mean, they've tightened up a little bit with the opioids, but Xanax and Adderall, they'll give that out like candy. Yeah. You know, you tell them I'm having anxiety, here you go, Xanax. And I've sent people to rehab, many people who are addicted to Xanax, right? It's addictive, highly addictive. And you know, it's scary stuff, you know, but we have to teach about alternatives, right? I mean, I think that's the key. Ask, is there an alternative that's not addictive? Right. Just start there, and you'll be amazed. There is.
There are.
You know,
may not be as effective,
Right.
but close.
But
Enough to get you by.
Sometimes pain is a good thing, right? It shows
Sure.
you when you're healing, and you
Yep.
know when you're healing, right? You know, like you're going to have some pain.
Your
and it'll get-
limitations.
Right. You're not going to push yourself to a point where you can hurt yourself more, you know. And, you know, I don't want to see people suffer. There are people who have chronic pain who need
Right.
that. One of my best friends has like a fentanyl patch on all the time, and he takes Percocets because he had a horrible surgery that went wrong on his neck, and without it. But he's highly functional. You would never know because it's treating the pain.
Right.
But for a lot of people, that's not the way it works.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but listen, we have the resources here, right? And we can keep talking about these things.
We're fortunate to have the resources, to have the support, right? To have people that are buying in. It's not just one guy running around saying, "Hey, you know, we got to do this." It's a collective thing here that we got going on. And you know, like I said before, I think you're doing an awesome job. And I wish, you know, we had more guys. You know, I wish every trade had somebody. I wish every local, you know, with us around the country had somebody. And it would help a lot of people. You know, again, I said it before. You know, these guys that are in these out there in the Midwest where everybody's all spread out and nobody's ever laying eyes on that guy. You know, he could have all the warning signs. All somebody has to do is see him, and they pull the plug on him, right? And that guy's going to go, you know, unnoticed. So, you know, at least here, you know, most of our industry, you know, we work with a crew or work as a team. You know, we got service guys that work by themselves, but it's so important. And you said it before, you're not being a rat, you're being a brother. You know, how could you lay your head on the pillow when you could have said something, and that poor guy, you know, is not here no more, and his family's dealing with this terrible loss. So, listen, man, I applaud you for what you're doing. You know, we've had many conversations to be able to freely talk about, you know, where you came from. I think just gives incredible credibility to what you're talking about and what you're trying to bring to the local, to be able to, you know, there's a lot of funny stories too that, you know, we'll have you on and we'll talk about them too. You know what my favorite one is, but you know, it's all good stuff. But you know, to be able to talk about where you came from, and for me to comfortably poke you in the ribs a little bit, you know, I'd feel we're good enough friends to where I could just, you know, make a comment that maybe, you know, you couldn't make to somebody else, because I know, you know, where we are as friends, but also your mentality of being able to openly talk about, yeah, this is me, man. I was a mess.
And listen, I was sober 20 years before I ever mentioned that I had tried to take my own life, because I was filled with shame with that. Like,
Yeah.
you know, growing up as a Bronx Irish Catholic, that was the ultimate sin, right? Like, you're going to burn in hell.
Right.
You kill yourself, right? And I knew that, and I believed that, and it was just like this. I just buried it, and I was at a training for suicide prevention and awareness, and it hit me, and I talked about it there, and I started bawling, crying, right? Like in front of like 20 other building trades people. Like, I was just a sobbing mess. And I was like, I need to say this out loud to people, right? To know that they're not alone, right? And I need to start asking the question. And I think every one of our members, I don't care if you're trained or not, like, I think if you notice or someone starts to tell you that they're suffering and they're going through depression, you need to just ask the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you thinking of suicide? And I know it's hard, and it was hard for me when I did it. But no one's ever said, how dare you ask me that question? They've either said no, or they've said, yeah, I am thinking about it. I think about it every day, but I'm not going to do it. Or I've heard, yeah, I'm going to do it, and I have a plan. Now, you need to know what to do in those situations, right? And that's why we have all this training, to be able to know what to do. But it doesn't stop us from being able to ask that question to people. Are you okay? And are you thinking of hurting yourself? You know, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, that would have been unheard of. Right. People would have, you know, told you, get out of here. We don't talk like that. The way we talk now makes it better. Like, we can sit and talk because I'm willing to talk about things. You're willing to talk about things. It changes the whole dynamic of what real brotherhood and sisterhood is. And it's that we are here to pick each other up when we need it. You know, it was funny. I wasn't going to bring this up, but I'm going to bring it up because it's important. So, you know, I was going through my Facebook feed the last couple of weeks, and, you know, I'm watching some reel or whatever, and I started getting these feeds on these pictures, right, these paintings of Jesus Christ, right, in different settings, right? I thought, oh, that was really nice, you know. And listen, I'm a Catholic, but you know, I really don't go to church, but I believe in God. And there was this one painting you could buy as a print, and it showed like Jesus looking down into the water with his hand in the water, like going to pull somebody out from underneath. And it kept coming up, and all of a sudden it kind of really hit home with me. I was like, man, you know, that's how I felt. I was drowning.
Yeah.
And not only did the hand of God save me, and for years I pushed that hand away, right? But then there was all these men I met, and their hand was there. These sober men who were like, here. Men from this union who were like, here, take my hand, we'll help you. And now I get to be like that hand.
Right.
So I kept seeing this painting, and I was like, I'm going to buy this. And I bought the painting. It's a big, like 20 by 30. And I just put it in my office today. And I'm going to put it in my office, and I hope people ask me, what's that? And I'm going to say, it's the hand. The hand that's there to help. Whether you believe in God or not, or religion has nothing to do with religion. Right? It's the hand of help is there. But it spoke to me so genuinely that I felt like, I got to get this, and I'm going to put it in my office. And I hope people ask me what it is. Right? And we can have that conversation about that drowning man. Because a lot of us are drowning, and we're not reaching out. You know, and if we can just be that hand, you know, and all of us can do that. And I think what Local One has done is, you know, by far, leaps and bounds better than anybody, like we usually do. We are the, you know, we're at the top of the food chain. You know, we know that. You know, what we do, they follow. And that's great. And that's, you know, I say that because it's proven, right? And, you know, I want to just keep it. And I think this podcast is another thing that we're doing that nobody else is doing. And it's going to set off another train of, you know.
Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah, they're all going to want to come out here and be on Who's Going for Coffee. And I think what you guys are doing and with the Local One and with the leadership here and the ideas that we're always moving forward. And I appreciate, you know, what you do and Phil and, you know. You always have a lot of good ideas, Rich. That's why I love having conversations with you. You know, we always have a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, we try. Some of them aren't so good. Some of them are kind of stupid. But you gotta throw them out there and say them out loud. You never know what's gonna stick on a wall, right? But listen, I can't tell you how proud I am of you, where you came from, and what you're doing for this local. You are that hand to a lot of guys, you know, and even to more people than you think, right? You know, inspire people, myself too. You know, not that I ever dealt with any kind of addiction problems. Thank God, my father, that's what put him in the grave, right? You know, I just, thank God, I'm not built that way, right? And I'm able to, you know, go roll them down and not even want it for a month, you know? So I'm very grateful for that. But listen, there's other things too, right? It's not just about addiction. It's just about overcoming anything, right? That's got to be like, you know, one of the most difficult things to do is to beat addiction, right? So if you can beat that, then I can beat, you know, some other thing that I'm trying to beat, whether it's trying to lose 10 pounds, whether it's trying to not procrastinate or whatever. And, you know, it's all excuses and not getting it done. You know, when I look at guys like yourself that, you know, just overcame, you know, this monster that when I look at little issues that I might deal with from time to time, you're like, man, that's small time compared to what these guys are doing. So you're an inspiration to a lot of people, to me and to this local, and just keep doing what you're doing. I wish you were 20 years younger so that you'd be here for 20, 30 years.
I may have to stay here. I got 2 kids in college.
Well, listen, you got to cut them loose one of these days. But
they don't want to leave. They just keep coming back.
Yeah.
But the great thing too is also, you know, we've learned, you know, when it talks about our guys especially, right, our members. And, you know, for years there's that stigmatism around mental illness. And it's almost like this word that you think, oh, illness. So when I talk to our guys, I say, let's talk about it like this. Where's your mental fitness? Where's your mental fitness today?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we correlate it to like going to the gym. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you doing things for your mental fitness? And then we can have a conversation as men that it kind of takes away that stigmatism, right? And it's not just this icky word that no one wants to talk about. Like, hey, where's your mental fitness? Where you at? What are you doing today? You'd be amazed when you ask people, like, what do you do for self-care? And people are like, well, I used to do this, or I used to do that, but I got too busy, and they don't do anything.
Right.
but we can teach them stuff, and we can talk about it, and we can make it a regular part. And I think the younger generation coming in and our workforce coming up is much more receptive to this. I teach in a school, and I deal with these young guys coming in, and they like talking about it. In the classrooms, they like talking about it. So that's great.
Well, the other thing too is everybody knows somebody.
Yeah.
That deals with it, right? So it's not like you're saying, hey, we're talking about this, and it's a rare thing, and nobody really deals with that thing. Everybody knows somebody that's suffered from some form of addiction. Everybody. There isn't anybody that doesn't know somebody. So it resonates with everybody. Everybody's ears perk up, and they'll remember their father, their brother, their sister, their friend, the guy down the street, or them, unfortunately, themselves. A lot of times, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Everybody. So it's listen, I love what we're doing here. I have a lot of ideas we can do on podcasts. We can get a bunch of guys in this room and tell some really good stories, bro. That'd be funny.
Sure we can.
We got to cast the characters, right? Like who come in here, especially guys who have been through it and like how they came out. And there's tons of them, And I would love to be able to do something like that in the future. Yeah. You just got to work on your green room because there was no snacks. And I was waiting, in the green room.
We got the snacks on water.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we got to work on that.
We'll have plenty of beers in the refrigerator for you guys. It's not going to be a problem.
Water and coffee for my guys, and we're good.
There you go. Well, listen, man, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing. You have our support anytime you need, any help. Just dial us up.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me today.
Appreciate it, bro.
Let's go.
Take it.
Who's going for coffee? Who's going for coffee?